Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started this morning, this afternoon, even this evening for some of you, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Nick Siemens. I am the Executive Director of the Office of International Affairs and an Assistant Dean of Students at the university. I'm thrilled to be with you this morning and to share with you as parents and our partners some pertinent information specific to the student visa status that your child, may be entering the United States under in order to study here at the University of Chicago. So we'll cover a number of different topics today, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. I will also be adding some links in the chat as we go. But certainly, the information is dense. The recording of today's session will be sent out by the College Programming Office, and that will also include the slides and anything that we cover this morning. So just an introduction to the Office of International Affairs. We are a central office to the entire university. We certainly support students in the college, but also students in the law school or in PhD programs. The second half of this office supports the employment-based immigration for the university, and that includes filing H-1Bs and green cards for faculty and staff and postdocs and others. But focusing today specifically on our services to students, international students in particular, who are coming from abroad on a student visa, either the F1 or J1 student visa. And just focusing on the fact that at the University of Chicago, there are a number of advisors that your students will have access to while they are here. The Office of International Affairs is yet one of those advisors and one of the offices that is meant to support students as they arrive and as they progress through their academic program. All international students arriving at the university are assigned an international student advisor, and that advisor is specific to the school that they've been admitted to. So in the case of the college, we have two OIA advisors that are assigned to students, international students in the college. Your student will actually receive a welcome email and an introduction from their advisors, as well as meet them during the pre-orientation or orientation welcome week as they arrive on campus here in the next couple of weeks. If you are arriving with your student, you will also have the opportunity to meet either Samuel or Angelica, who are the two advisors assigned to the college. But again, they will receive a welcome email, an introduction, and in that email, they will receive information about how to schedule appointments with their advisor at OIA, what their drop-in hours are, how to contact them otherwise via email or telephone, those types of things. So one of the things we often tell international students is that OIA is your central resource for all things visa-related or immigration-related specific to the United States. There is, as many of you know, a lot of information, a lot of legal interpretation and procedural, information that is available online. Perhaps you've had, other children attend other institutions. One thing just to keep in mind is that, within immigration, small factual differences can make a pretty impactful change or difference in the guidance and advising, especially as administrations in this country change, government updates, are made and other things. So we always remind students to check in with OIA if they're unsure about something that they're doing that may have an impact on their immigration status in the United States. So as I mentioned earlier, all OIA advisors will hold drop-in hours. They're available for appointments, to be scheduled. They certainly are available via email and phone. We are located on campus, but as we know now, more and more of our students prefer to reach out to us or to attend webinars to attend appointments, even virtually via Zoom. And all of those things are available to your students. In addition to the immigration advising the Office of International Affairs provides, we also work very closely with career advancement, student counseling, the college programming office, a number of other offices to develop and deliver supportive programs to students who are international and navigating, for example, obtaining an internship in their first summer and what that looks like, not just in particular to obtaining the internship, but what permissions, what authorizations are required specific to their visa status in order for them to proceed with the internship. We hold workshops throughout the year on things like OPT, as your student gets closer to graduation, CPT, US taxes, travel, and a whole lot more. So certainly something to keep in mind, that, in addition to just advising, the office also supports some of the more specific internationally focused programs that support international students here at the university. So a few quick reminders, and we will be sharing much of this information with your students as they prepare to arrive, and certainly as they arrive here at the university. One of the first things that we will ask them to do is complete a check-in with the Office of International Affairs. Check-in is completed online. It is an online form that asks for their arrival record in the United States. And that is so that we can verify that the U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer at the airport or at the land port actually entered the correct status for your student as they arrived in the United States. It's important that they've presented their I-20 or DS-2019 documents along with their valid passport and their unexpired visa sticker in order to enter in a specific status in the U.S. We will have, and we have sent a number of materials to students, especially if they are navigating U.S. Customs for the first time. And, that's something that they, that they should be receiving and be prepared to answer, that they are here to study at the university, and, our students here at the University of Chicago. Couple of things that are required of students in F1 or J1 status. They must be enrolled full-time throughout the academic year. That is something that we verify on the quarter, and if there are differences or if they've under-enrolled, then they will be receiving an email asking them to enroll full-time. They are required to maintain a valid U.S. address throughout their entire program here at the University of Chicago. And that means that even in between, years 1 and 2 or 2 and 3, 3 and 4, et cetera, as they move, perhaps within the residence halls or eventually off campus, they are required to update and maintain a valid U.S. address via their my.uchicago.edu portal. International students on visas are restricted from working off campus in any capacity, that's paid or unpaid, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But they're also required to report changes that might have an impact to their immigration status, like taking a leave of absence or needing to transfer to a different school, or if they are pending a different visa status in the United States. Once that's approved, those things can be reported and we can help them navigate that process. Students are always reminded that they are responsible for maintaining valid documents, and that includes their passport. And we'll talk a little bit more about an expired visa sticker here in a moment. The most important thing always is that students know that we are here. We don't expect that they remember all of this information. We expect them to reach out if they have questions. And do so with their advisor here in the office. A couple of quick notes here, just to get a little more detailed, specific to the immigration. Over the course of the next 4 years, your students likely will arrive in the United States a couple of times. They'll travel home, They might go on trips with friends. It is always important that students are aware of the fact that they will need a valid passport 6 months dated into the future from the next arrival, an unexpired F1 or J1 visa stamp or sticker that's placed in their passport, and a valid I-20 or DS-2019 with a travel signature that's dated not more than 12 months in the past. Those are the documents that are required for re-entry into the United States. If a student forgets one of those documents, an expired passport will likely prevent a student from boarding a plane abroad for the US. But what we don't want is for students to be subject to additional scrutiny as they arrive in the United States or delayed in any capacity, as that can be stressful, and we're aware of that. So we rely on you as your students' parents, and we will certainly send reminders to your students, letting them know that, when they can drop in for travel signature, that if they are traveling over the winter break, for example, that they keep these things in mind. Inevitably, and I would say probably every year, we have a student who calls frantically from O'Hare International Airport saying, "I forgot my I-20." Or my DS-2019, and we can support them through that process, but certainly something to keep in mind. We always recommend that students carry their original documents when traveling. A scanned copy of an I-20 or DS-2019, or scanned copies or electronic images of passports or visa stamps or stickers are not valid for entry, so that's something to keep in mind. However, we do recommend that students actually keep and maintain scanned and electronic copies of their important immigration documents, because a scanned or electronic copy that can be pulled up makes it far easier to replace a document in the event that it's needed than if you don't have a copy of the document altogether. We often get the question from students, can I travel in the United States? And if so, what documents do I need? We always, recommend that if you are traveling domestically in the US, that you are simply carrying your passport with you or some other form of government issued ID that allows you to board a plane at a US airport. I want to talk just quickly about the difference between the visa sticker and visa status. The stamp or sticker that's placed in your student's passport by the US consulate or embassy is used only for entry into the United States. It must be valid and presented with a valid passport and the unexpired I-20 or DS-2019 to be permitted entry in that status. If, while your student is here at the University of Chicago, and this often comes up, the visa stamp or sticker expires and they are in the United States in that status, they do not require immediate travel to renew the visa. The visa stamp or sticker itself can expire. It simply means the next time they depart the US, they will have to schedule an appointment at the US consulate or embassy and obtain an updated visa stamp or sticker in order to return. Again, we will share this information with your student, but we always enjoy sharing it with you as parents, who are, as I mentioned, our partners in ensuring some of this information makes it. So just a quick image of what a US visa stamp or sticker looks like. A quick note here that if your student is a Canadian citizen, they are exempt from navigating the visa stamp or sticker, but are required to have an unexpired passport and I-20 or DS-2019. We will remind your students to make calendar notifications, of not only their passport expiration, but their visa stamp or sticker expiration and travel signature expiration dates, so that they can, be reminded that they need to take action, with some amount of time in advance to plan and work through that process. A quick note before I move on, just to say that the US visas are not actually renewable in the United States currently. So in order to obtain an updated visa stamp or sticker, your student will have to apply at a U.S. consulate or embassy abroad. A quick question here that is specific to the travel signatures. So travel signature is placed on the I-20 or DS-2019, and we will actually move on to those documents here. The travel signature itself is valid for 12 months from the latest dated signature provided. So you can always review the I-20 or DS-2019, and if on the I-20 you look at page 2, that's where the travel signature is located. And on the DS-2019, it's on the lower right corner of the DS-2019, as you see here on the screen. Those signatures are valid for multiple re-entries, so long as the latest dated signature was within the past 12 months. It does not mean that your student requires an updated signature each and every time they travel abroad and re-enter. That is not required. It is also not the case that they need a signature every 6 months or every 8 months. It's literally 1 year from the date of the last signature. Just ensures that they have a smoother re-entry into the United States the next time they present their document. It's also worth noting here that while we were able to issue and send these documents electronically, your student will have to print and sign the document and carry it with them in their carry-on luggage, as they will not have access to it until after, they won't have access to their checked baggage until after they've cleared passport control in the United States. So making sure that they have their important documents with them on their person in the airline cabin instead of in their checked bag is important. Upon arrival, each and every individual arriving in the United States is issued what's called an I-94 arrival record. This is the record we will ask for them to upload as part of their OIA check-in. And it will indicate, as I mentioned earlier, not only the date that they arrived, but also some of their bio or demo data, including their name, passport number, birth date, the date of entry, and their class of admission or the visa status that they've been admitted into the United States in. This is what we're requesting to review at their first arrival. It's not required that they upload an I-94 to OIA each and every time they arrive, but we want to ensure that their first arrival was completed successfully, and this is what is required. It's an online form and process. It typically takes 24 to 48 hours after arrival for the I-94 record to appear via the website on the link that you see on the screen. We always recommend over the course of a student's time here that they obtain their I-94 records each and every time they do arrive. They won't need to provide that documentation or information to us at OIA or to anyone else at the university, but the I-94 record and the travel history can become helpful to them down the road as they navigate moving on to, for example, OPT or eventually onto an H-1B or some other visa classification in the US. So as I mentioned earlier, the visa sticker itself can expire so long as the I-20 is valid. Your student does not require immediate travel. If they have questions about that, they should always reach out. We certainly are available to provide support and answer those questions. I want to move on to an important topic that we know from not only from students, but also from parents. You know, in past years, they've had questions about whether students can work they work on campus, what's required, or at what point are they eligible to work off campus and take internships and those types of things. And so that's what we're going to move right into. Many of our students, perhaps not in their first year, but as they go into their second year or third year, they may find an on-campus job, and that might include working in the library on a temporary or part-time basis. It might be as a research assistant or working for one of their professors, you know, and gaining experience in the lab, something like that. All of those things are permitted per the F1 or J1 visa regulations. An international student can work on campus without prior authorization, so long as they do not work more than 20 hours per week in a given week during academic periods. During academic breaks, like summer, they can work full-time or beyond that 20 hours per week. But this is specific to on-campus employment only, right? So that would mean that they are working for the university in some capacity to earn perhaps, some spending money, et cetera. Those things are permitted. And again, we will cover this with your student, but they certainly should reach out if they have a question about a job they found and are unsure whether it's on campus or not. Off-campus employment is restricted per the F1 and J1 federal regulations that govern those visa types. And that includes paid or unpaid volunteer positions and others, really. Most of your students in their first year will not be eligible for CPT until somewhere between years 1 and 2. It's likely that they will obtain an internship and be working in the US, maybe in Chicago or elsewhere, for their internship in between years 1 and 2. And at that point, they will need to not only work with University of Chicago Career Advancement, who you've likely heard from, but also with their OIA advisor to ensure that they have the correct employment authorization that allows them to show up on day 1, especially if they're being paid, but also even if they're not being paid. Their employers are going to want to see employment authorization allowing them to be there legally. This is a big deal, and inevitably, again, every summer, students, a few students forget that this is a step they need to take. They show up on the first day, and they're told that they have to delay their start, or come back once they actually have CPT authorization. It's challenging, to keep all of these details in mind, but again, we will send reminders throughout the year. We hold workshops with Career Advancement. We're, in constant contact with them just to ensure that, that we're aware of, which students are going, to which employers for internships. But it still does require initiation on the part of the student to actually work through the application and ensure that they have all of the relevant, and specific details correct, so that, again, when they show up on day 1, they are permitted to begin work. I think, yeah, I think that's it on campus and then off campus employment. As your students, work toward graduation, that's really when we'll start to have the conversation about their post-graduation employment authorization. That includes OPT, STEM OPT, or if they're on J1 visas, it would include the academic training. So certainly they will get that information, but it doesn't really apply until they get closer to completing their degree. So just a quick summary. As mentioned, we will be reminding your students to complete check-in, and part of that process is updating their US address. They, I'm sure, already know their US address here at the university, and if they haven't already, they should now, even before they arrive, go into their my.uchicago.edu portal and update their address there. It is your students' responsibility that they maintain their F1 or J1 status. And as I mentioned, that requires that they are adhering to the parameters of that visa, that they pay close attention to the information that's shared with them, and ensure that they not violate that status, because that can have long-term consequences and academic consequences. Always, when traveling abroad, don't forget your documents. Understanding the difference between your visa stamp and sticker and your status, so that you're not stressing out, just because the visa stamp or sticker has actually expired in the middle of a quarter, and you feel like you need to depart the US and obtain a new visa. That's not required. So certainly remind them to check in. And then again, just quickly, on-campus is not restricted. On-campus employment is not restricted, but off-campus will require employment authorization. So there we go. There's a question here about Handshake. I think as your students arrive, and I don't know that on-campus jobs are actually listed. I don't know that all on-campus jobs are listed on Handshake. Most of those jobs on campus are posted through departments or on the HR website of the university, and are listed there for students. A quick note here, and it also pertains specifically to the first question in the queue here about driver's license, but students typically who arrive in F or J status are not going to be eligible for a Social Security number in the United States until after their first year, and likely not then until they have applied for and obtained CPT authorization or academic training authorization for their first year internship next summer. It's just SSN eligibility requirements that you are not eligible simply by virtue of being here on a visa. And the reason I bring this up in relation to the question, the first question is that in the state of Illinois, you are not eligible for a driver's license unless you have a Social Security number. So for a lot of international students, they are not immediately eligible to apply for or obtain an Illinois driver's license. However, if they have a driver's license from their home country, it is likely valid to be used, I believe, up to 180 days from their initial date of entry. So it's not something that's going to permit them to drive open-ended. They will eventually need to obtain an Illinois driver's license, but they won't be eligible for an Illinois driver's license until they apply for and have a Social Security number. And again, the Social Security number is not something that is immediately available to students. It's likely they won't actually obtain a Social Security number until after their first year here at the university. So one of the questions also here is about opening a bank account. Some banks require an ITIN. Not all banks do. Many of the universities affiliated banks like Citibank, Maroon Financial, which is a federal credit union, and others are not going to require a Social Security number or an ITIN. They may require some different documentation, but those bank accounts actually are successfully opened by students each and every year, and all students, as I mentioned, are not typically eligible, do not typically have a Social Security number immediately. I would say, like, if after your students arrive, they're navigating opening an account, working with a bank, near campus. Those banks are familiar with our students. They know that there are international students, many international students here at the university, and they work to support them through that process relatively quickly. Now that your child will actually be in the US, there will be tax responsibilities moving forward. Whether they work or don't work, they will be required to file a tax return of some kind with the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, here at not at the university, here in the United States. The Office of International Affairs, working with a number of other offices on campus, we do provide some tax preparation software. We send that information out to students starting typically in late February of every year. There are webinars, and the software will actually guide your student through that process and help them figure out what is required that they file, and when the deadline is and where they need to send that documentation. It's fairly straightforward, but I just mention it because we do often get the question. So some final reminders as we continue moving forward. One of the main things that we do try to convey to students, is that they need to keep their immigration documents, their important documentation, safe. We recommend that they maintain both physical and electronic copies of their documentation. Over the course of their time here, they will likely receive updated or new I-20s or DS-2019s. They may renew their passport. All of those documents should not just be kept in a safe, and consistent space or spot, but also kept electronically so that if they're needed, they can be pulled up and replaced, with the electronic copies. Your student is likely going to start receiving a number of newsletters from different offices across campus. The first, that is likely is from OIA. We will be sending a monthly newsletter to students, and it just has reminders, upcoming workshops, webinars, reminders about travel specifically. And that's where we also share with students changes, to immigration regulation. If those have come from the government, we do share that out via our newsletter and more. One thing that, because we're with you, the parents, one thing we always try to take advantage of is warning you, and we will warn your students that there are a number of sophisticated scams happening at any one time, I think, around the world. But in the United States, one of the more sophisticated scams is someone calling and pretending or purporting to be a government agent, either from the student's home government or the US government, and requiring payment of a fee or fine online or over the phone in order to satisfy the requirement. Those things are full scams. We will just say that the government will not ever call you. And if your student gets a call like that, they should hang up and block the number. We have additional information on our website that outlines some of this information, but certainly just take the opportunity with you to say that it is likely that at some point while your student is here, they will receive a phone call that sounds suspicious. Have a conversation with them, let them know that, this is not unlikely, it's not uncommon, and, they are not required to speak to anyone by telephone at any point. And then, of course, as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, there are a number of campus resources available for students. They're going to meet a lot of different offices who are on campus to support them over the course of their next 4 years. And, certainly we encourage them to take advantage, of the service that's available, to them moving forward. So as we wrap up, just a few final things. We have a website. We are available, both in person and also virtually. And reminder that students should reach out if they do have questions. So there are a couple of questions here that I thought we would run through, and then certainly add or post more questions if you have them. The first is, how can my child change their residence to Chicago? I'm not sure that I fully understand that question, but they can update their U.S. address via their my.uchicago.edu web portal, and that will allow them to at least provide a U.S. address. They likely know it now already. The next question: what is the difference between Metcalf and Handshake? Metcalf is a program that supports internships at the college. Often, students who have Metcalf internships may be receiving funding in order to proceed with their internship. Handshake is just the online software platform that Career Advancement uses to post not only opportunities for internships and jobs, but also allows students to post, their resumes and share their information in a way that they might actually be able to connect with someone there. The next question is, in the webinar yesterday, they confirmed the Handshake was available, but we checked again today and still getting the same error. That I'm not sure. I'm not sure who you saw yesterday in the webinar, but you might reach out to that person just to let them know that this is an issue that is persisting. I'm not familiar. We don't work specifically with Handshake, but certainly reach out to the individuals who you heard from yesterday, and they should be able to get that sorted for you. A question about taxes automatically being withheld when a student receives aid and/or salary. Yes, so typically, if a student is receiving aid or they earn money during their internship, or perhaps they have an on-campus job, certain taxes will automatically be withheld. And that is why each calendar year, again, somewhere between the end of February and mid-April, your student will file a tax return. If they withheld more taxes than were owed or due, the difference will be refunded to your student. If they underpaid for whatever reason, which is not as typical, then they may get a tax bill saying that they owe more taxes. I wanted to just share a couple of quick links to all of you. The Office of International Affairs maintains some pretty robust resources and information via our admitted students page on the link shared there. And then I was going to also share with you information specific to the check-in. So again, check-in is not something that your student can do until they've arrived in the United States and they have that I-94 arrival record. But certainly, remind them of that. Again, specific questions about Handshake should be directed to the webinar presenters from yesterday or career advancement. That is, again, not a software platform that I'm familiar with. I don't know if they are having an issue, but if they are, then I'm sure they're working on it and working to get it resolved as quickly as possible. The final link that I'll share with you is specific to scams, just so you as parents, have this information as well. But certainly in the event that you hear from your student that that they've had a phone call, then they can check out the information on that page as well. So unless there are any further questions, I want to thank you all for being with us this morning. We certainly look forward to meeting many of you as you arrive in Chicago and on campus in the next couple of weeks. We certainly look forward to welcoming you and your students to the university. So a question just popped up about ITIN. An SSN is not required for college stipends, but the ITIN process will be handled with their first tax return in February of next year. It may also be that financial aid will provide some support to students who do need ITINs, and they can always reach out to us as well. We do have some information on our website, that can guide students through that process. Thank you again. Unless there are any further questions, have a wonderful rest of the day and a nice weekend. And again, we look forward to welcoming you and your students to the University of Chicago. Thank you and take care. Bye-bye.